Most people will never maximize profits, and it has nothing to do with intelligence. People love simple answers to complicated problems, especially when money is involved. They want a trick, a shortcut, a secret lever they can pull that suddenly makes profits appear. And that desire is precisely why most people never maximize profits in the first place. They chase techniques before they understand reality. They copy behavior without understanding context. They want certainty in a domain where certainty is the most expensive illusion you can buy. So before we talk about techniques, we need to talk about something far more uncomfortable. Why most people, even intelligent and hardworking ones, systematically sabotage their own financial outcomes while believing they are being smart. The truth is that profits are rarely limited by opportunity. They are limited by behavior, limited by impatience, limited by the refusal to think probabilistically, limited by emotional reactions disguised as logic. I have spent decades watching markets, businesses, and individuals repeat the same mistakes with different vocabulary. They read new books, follow new experts, adopt new tools, yet somehow arrive at the same disappointing results. This is not because the tools are useless. It is because tools in the hands of an undisciplined mind amplify errors faster than they create gains. Most people believe maximizing profits means pushing harder, acting faster, taking more risk. That belief alone quietly caps their upside. Real profit maximization begins with subtraction, not addition, removing unnecessary decisions, removing emotional noise, removing the urge to be constantly active. The highest performing investors and operators I know do fewer things, not more. They wait longer, not shorter. They say no more often than yes. And that patience is not passive. It is highly selective aggression. The problem is that selective aggression looks boring from the outside. It does not satisfy the human craving for motion. So people reject it and then rationalize their losses as bad luck. Here is the first uncomfortable reality. Most profits are made by being right occasionally, not constantly. Yet most people structure their behavior as if they must always be doing something. They confuse movement with progress. They confuse complexity with sophistication. They confuse information with insight. The market does not reward effort. It rewards accuracy. And accuracy is often the result of waiting while others exhaust themselves. This is why the best techniques rarely feel like techniques at all. They feel like restraint. They feel like discipline. They feel like boredom punctuated by decisive action. And boredom is something most people cannot tolerate, especially in a world addicted to stimulation. Another reality few want to hear is that profit maximization requires a tolerance for looking wrong, sometimes for long periods. The crowd will disagree with you. Headlines will mock you. Friends will question you. If your sense of self is tied to approval, you will exit good positions too early and enter bad ones too late. This is not a technical problem. It is a psychological one. Markets transfer money from the impatient to the patient, from the reactive to the prepared. Every technique worth using is built on this transfer mechanism. If you do not understand that, you will misapply every strategy you learn. Consider how people react to volatility. They say they want high returns, but they panic at temporary losses. They say they understand risk, but they emotionally price every fluctuation as permanent. Profit maximization demands that you reverse this instinct. You must become comfortable with temporary discomfort in exchange for long-term advantage. This is not natural. It must be trained. Most people refuse to train it because it feels like suffering. But the market does not care about your comfort. It cares about your positioning. There is also the issue of time horizon, which is where amateurs quietly lose the game before it starts. If your time horizon is short, your decision quality collapses. You react to noise. You overtrade. You optimize for small gains while exposing yourself to large risks. Professionals stretch their time horizon because it filters out distraction. It allows compounding to work without interference. Compounding is not magic. It is math combined with patience. Remove patience and the math collapses. Yet people constantly interrupt compounding because they want to feel productive. This urge is expensive. Let me be clear about something most experts avoid saying directly. Many people are not underperforming because they lack knowledge. They are underperforming because they lack temperament. They know what they should do. They simply cannot bring themselves to do it consistently. They abandon strategies at the worst possible moment. They chase performance after it has already happened. They manage their money based on emotion and then look for intellectual justifications afterward. This is backwards. Profits are made by deciding in advance how you will behave when things go wrong, not when they are going well. The techniques that maximize profits are boring to learn and difficult to execute because they require self-control. They require you to accept that you will miss opportunities. They require you to accept that you will never capture the exact top or bottom. They require you to accept that the goal is not to be impressive, but to be effective. Effectiveness compounds quietly. Flashiness does not. Over time, the difference becomes brutal. If you want to maximize profits, you must stop asking how to make more and start asking how to lose less. Loss avoidance has asymmetric power. A 50% loss requires a 100% gain to recover. That math alone should terrify you into discipline. And yet people routinely ignore it because fear clouds judgment in the moment. The best techniques are designed to protect you from yourself first and the market second, until you understand that no expert advice will save you. This is the foundation. Without it, everything else becomes decoration. With it, even simple techniques become powerful. And that is where the real conversation about maximizing profits actually begins. Once you accept that behavior is the bottleneck, not opportunity, the entire conversation about profit maximization changes. You stop looking for clever tricks and start building systems that make good behavior easier and bad behavior harder. This is where most people fail again because systems feel restrictive. They mistake freedom for optionality, when in reality, optionality without rules leads to chaos. The highest performers constrain themselves deliberately. They decide in advance what they will not do. That decision alone eliminates a huge percentage of mistakes that quietly erode profits over time. One of the most misunderstood ideas in profit maximization is focus. People assume focus means concentration, effort, or working harder. In practice, focus means narrowing the field of decisions so that only high-quality opportunities remain. Every additional choice you allow yourself increases the probability of error. This is why experts specialize, not because they are incapable of understanding other areas, but because depth produces edge, and edge is where profits come from. Shallow knowledge across many domains feels safer, but it is usually unprofitable. You cannot outperform in a field you only partially understand. You can only survive. And survival is not the same as maximization. Another uncomfortable truth is that people overestimate their ability to process information. They consume endless news, data, opinions, and commentary, believing it makes them informed. In reality, it overwhelms their judgment. Noise crowds out signal. The more inputs you consume, the harder it becomes to identify what actually matters. The best professionals are extremely selective about what they pay attention to. They are not ignorant. They are disciplined. They know that attention is a finite resource, and wasting it is costly. If you want higher profits, you must protect your attention as aggressively as you protect your capital. This leads to a critical technique that sounds simple, but is rarely practiced: deliberate an activity. Waiting is not the absence of strategy. It is an active decision. Many of the largest profits are made by doing nothing until conditions align. This is psychologically difficult because waiting produces no immediate feedback. There is no sense of accomplishment, no dopamine hit. Yet waiting allows clarity to emerge. It allows mispricings to become obvious. It allows others to make mistakes first. When you finally act, you act with conviction, not hope. Hope is not a strategy. Conviction, grounded in preparation, is risk management is another area where people misunderstand maximization. They think managing risk reduces returns. In reality, unmanaged risk destroys them. The purpose of risk management is not to eliminate risk, but to ensure that no single mistake can end the game. The ability to stay in the game is the most underrated advantage there is. If you cannot survive volatility, you cannot benefit from long-term opportunity. Experts structure their exposure so that errors are survivable. Amateurs structure theirs so that errors are catastrophic. The difference in outcomes over time is not subtle. There is also the issue of leverage, which attracts people like a magnet because it promises faster results. Leverage amplifies skill, but it also amplifies ignorance. Used carefully, it can enhance returns. Used emotionally, it accelerates ruin. Most people apply leverage before they have proven consistency. They borrow confidence from recent success and mistake it for competence. This is how short-term wins turn into long-term damage. True experts increase leverage only after systems are tested across different conditions. They respect variance. They do not assume the future will resemble the recent past. Another principle that separates high-level performers is their relationship with mistakes. They do not avoid mistakes by pretending they will not happen. They plan for them. They analyze them without ego. They adjust processes instead of assigning blame. Each mistake becomes data. For most people, mistakes become trauma. They either freeze or overcorrect. Both reactions are expensive. Profit maximization requires emotional neutrality. You cannot extract lessons from outcomes you take personally. The market does not know you exist. Taking its behavior personally is a waste of energy. Let's also address diversification, which is often misunderstood. Diversification is protection against ignorance, not a substitute for understanding. Excessive diversification dilutes returns and creates false comfort. Insufficient diversification creates fragility. The balance lies in owning a small number of positions you understand deeply, combined with structural safeguards that prevent any one position from causing irreparable harm. This balance is uncomfortable because it requires judgment, not formulas. Judgment develops slowly through experience and reflection. People want formulas because formulas remove responsibility. Unfortunately, they also remove edge. Time once again plays a decisive role here. Maximizing profits is rarely about timing the market perfectly. It is about time in the right positions. Entry matters, but endurance matters more. The ability to hold through uncertainty is what allows asymmetry to work in your favor. Most people exit just as the probability distribution begins to shift. They mistake temporary stagnation for failure. Experts understand that meaningful results often arrive late. They structure their expectations accordingly. Impatience is punished. Persistence is rewarded. but only when paired with selectivity. At this stage, the pattern should be clear. Every effective technique requires a corresponding psychological adjustment. Without it, the technique fails. This is why copying strategies rarely works. You copy the surface behavior without adopting the internal discipline that made it effective. Maximizing profits is less about learning what to do and more about learning who to become. That transformation is slow, uncomfortable, and unglamorous. But it is also the only path that consistently works. And now that we have established the internal architecture required for profit maximization, we can move toward the external execution. The practical choices, the allocation decisions, and the strategic trade-offs that separate those who grow wealth steadily from those who constantly restart after setbacks. Once execution enters the picture, the gap between theory and results widens dramatically. This is where people who understand the ideas still fail, because execution exposes inconsistency. It forces decisions under pressure. It removes the comfort of hindsight, and it punishes half commitment. Maximizing profits in execution is not about brilliance in any single moment. It is about alignment across hundreds of small decisions made correctly enough, often when no one is watching and no applause is coming. The first execution error most people make is confusing flexibility with adaptability. They tell themselves they are being flexible when in reality they are being reactive. True adaptability is slow and deliberate. It involves changing strategy only when underlying conditions change, not when emotions fluctuate. Reactivity feels responsive, but it is actually a loss of control. Every time you abandon a plan mid-execution without new information, you train yourself to distrust your own judgment. Over time, this erodes confidence and leads to paralysis or recklessness. Neither maximizes profits. Experts execute with pre-commitment. They decide in advance how they will act across a range of scenarios. They do not improvise under stress. This does not make them rigid. It makes them resilient. Pre-commitment removes emotion from moments where emotion is least reliable. It also conserves mental energy. Decision fatigue is real, and exhausted minds make expensive choices. Systems exist to protect you from fatigue, not to constrain your intelligence. The more capital at stake, the more systematized execution must become. Another critical element of execution is position sizing. Many people focus on picking the right opportunity while ignoring how much they allocate to it. This is a mistake. Even a great opportunity can damage overall results if sized incorrectly. Conversely, a mediocre opportunity sized well can contribute positively. Position sizing is where risk, confidence, and humility intersect. Overconfidence leads to oversized positions. Fear leads to undersized ones. Both reduce long-term returns. Professionals calibrate size based on probability and impact, not emotion or excitement. Consistency in execution also requires accepting that most actions will feel uncomfortable in the moment. Buying feels worse when uncertainty is high. Selling feels worse when optimism is widespread. Holding feels worst when nothing seems to be happening. If your actions feel comfortable, you are probably late. Markets were willing to act against emotional consensus. This is not contrarianism for its own sake. It is probabilistic reasoning applied when sentiment distorts pricing. Comfort is a lagging indicator. Another overlooked factor is environment design. People underestimate how much their surroundings influence their behavior. Constant alerts, social media, financial news, and opinionated commentary create a state of perpetual agitation. This environment makes disciplined execution almost impossible. Experts curate their environment ruthlessly. They reduce inputs, schedule decision, making and create distance between stimulus and response. This is not weakness. It is wisdom. You cannot execute well in a state of constant reaction. Let's talk about patience again, but this time in executional terms. Patience is not waiting indefinitely. It is waiting with criteria. It is knowing exactly what conditions justify action and which do not. Without criteria, waiting becomes procrastination. With criteria, waiting becomes strategy. Most people wait without clarity and act without conviction. Experts reverse this. They wait with clarity and act decisively. This inversion alone accounts for a massive difference in outcomes. Another execution mistake is the refusal to scale gradually. People want immediate impact. They want confirmation quickly. They want to feel progress. Scaling slowly feels inefficient, but it protects against error. It allows feedback to accumulate. It turns execution into a learning process rather than a gamble. Those who scale too fast turn small mistakes into large losses. Those who scale thoughtfully compound both capital and competence. There is also the issue of review, which most people avoid because it is uncomfortable. Reviewing decisions honestly means confronting mistakes without excuses. It means separating outcome from process. A good result achieved through bad reasoning is dangerous. A bad result achieved through good reasoning is informative. Experts review both. Amateurs review only losses, and even then defensively. Without review, execution does not improve. It stagnates. Finally, execution at a high level requires accepting that maximization is not a straight line. Drawdowns happen. Plateaus happen. Periods of underperformance happen. The difference is that experts expect them and plan around them. They do not abandon discipline during these periods. They tighten it. They understand that consistency through difficulty is what creates separation over time. Most people quit right before the curve bends in their favor. Execution is where intentions become outcomes. It is where discipline becomes visible. And it is where most people quietly opt out by choosing comfort over correctness. Those who commit to structured, patient, and emotionally neutral execution place themselves in a small minority. And that minority captures a disproportionate share of long-term profits. At this point, the idea of maximizing profits should look very different from how it is usually presented. It is no longer about chasing upside or discovering hidden techniques. It is about alignment between behavior and goals, alignment between time horizon and strategy, alignment between emotional capacity and exposure. When these elements are misaligned, even the best techniques fail. When they are aligned, even simple approaches work remarkably well. This is the final layer most people never reach because it forces an honest confrontation with themselves rather than the market. The most dangerous mistake people make late in the process is believing they are finished learning. Early on, ignorance is obvious. Later, it becomes subtle. Confidence increases, results improve, and complacency sneaks in disguised as experience. This is where profits quietly decay. Experts remain skeptical of their own success. They assume conditions can change. They assume their models are incomplete. This humility is not weakness. It is adaptive strength. The moment you believe you have mastered the game changes and collects its fee. Another critical shift happens when people stop measuring success by short-term outcomes and start measuring it by decision quality. This sounds abstract, but it is deeply practical. You cannot control outcomes in complex systems. You can control inputs and process. When you judge yourself by outcomes alone, you reinforce bad habits during lucky periods and abandon good habits during unlucky ones. When you judge yourself by decision quality, you stabilize behavior. Over time, outcomes follow. This is how professionals maintain consistency across decades rather than cycles. Maximizing profits also requires redefining what profit actually means. For many, profit is a number on a statement. For those who last, profit includes optionality, flexibility, and peace of mind. A strategy that generates high returns but destroys sleep, relationships, or health is not maximizing anything. It is borrowing from assets that do not regenerate easily. Experts understand that sustainability is not a moral concept. It is a performance one. Burnout, stress, and constant anxiety degrade judgment. Degraded judgment destroys returns. Protecting mental clarity is a profit strategy. This brings us to the idea of enough, which is uncomfortable in a culture that glorifies endless growth. Without a concept of enough, maximization turns into compulsion. People take unnecessary risks, not because the opportunity demands it, but because they have not defined what success looks like. Clear goals create boundaries. Boundaries reduce error. When you know what you are trying to achieve and why, you stop gambling for validation. You start allocating for outcomes that actually matter to you. This clarity is rare, and it is incredibly powerful. There is also a final paradox worth addressing. The people who maximize profits most effectively are often the least obsessed with profits themselves. They are obsessed with process, with learning, with avoiding stupidity. They focus on not losing money in obvious ways. They focus on improving slightly, consistently. They let compounding do the heavy lifting. This approach feels slow, especially at the beginning, but over time, it creates an advantage that is extremely difficult to catch. Contrast this with the typical approach. Constant searching, constant tweaking, constant second guessing. This creates activity without progress. It feels engaged, but it is scattered. Scattered effort rarely maximizes anything. Concentrated effort, applied patiently, does. This is true in markets, in business, and in life. The principles do not change. Only the context does. If there is one final technique that deserves emphasis, it is the technique of self-restraint. The ability to stop, to not act, to not optimize endlessly, to accept good enough when good enough aligns with your objectives. This is not resignation. It is mastery, knowing when not to push is as important as knowing when to push. Most people never learn this because restraint does not feel like achievement. It feels like denial. In reality, it is strategic clarity. Over a long enough timeline, profits accrue to those who make fewer large mistakes, not those who make the most aggressive moves. Avoiding stupidity beats brilliance. This is not a motivational slogan. It is an empirical observation. The biggest losses are rarely the result of complex errors. They are the result of simple ones repeated or magnified. Greed, fear, ego, impatience. Every effective system is designed to neutralize these forces, not eliminate them, but contain them. So when you hear about techniques for maximizing profits, remember this. Techniques are tools. Tools amplify what is already there. If discipline is there, they amplify success. If chaos is there, they amplify failure. The real work happens before the technique is ever applied. It happens in how you think, how you prepare, how you decide, and how you behave when no one is watching. This is why true expertise feels quiet. There is no urgency, no constant motion. No need to impress, just consistent, deliberate action aligned with long-term goals. That is what maximization actually looks like when it's like not excitement, but endurance. Not constant gains, but resilient progress. And not cleverness, but clarity applied again and again over time. When you understand this, you stop chasing profits and start positioning yourself to receive them. And that shift makes all the difference.